adding jobs, but not enough jobs. The labor force participation rate remaining at its lowest level since 1977. Some of these guys saying we need to bring taxes down to get jobs way back up. Are they right? Hi, everyone. I'm Brenda Buttner. This is Bulls and Bears. And here they are, the Bulls and Bears this week. Gary B. Smith, Jonas Max Ferris, John Layfield, along with Lisa Booth and Chuck Rocha. Welcome to everybody. Okay, Lisa.
Hi, Brenda.
So do we need tax cuts to get bigger job gains?
We do, and look, a lot of these Republican candidates who are talking about job creation have earned the right to do so. Look, Florida was #1 in job creation under Jeb Bush's watch. John Kasich, as governor of Ohio, has added 300,000 jobs. Just look at states like Florida and Texas. They have a job creation rate of 2 to 3 times higher than that of California and New York. If you look at the Bureau of Labor statistics, just between the years of 2007 to 2010, Texas added more jobs than 49 states combined. As you know, Texas has no corporate or individual income taxes. So just look at the states.
Well, what do you look at, Chuck?
Well, what I look at is a Republican primary debate, and that's kind of like asking a bunch of kids if they like ice cream. Of course they're going to talk about tax cuts, but there's a history here. When George Bush was there, he cut taxes to an all-time low, and we went into a recession. Am I for tax cuts? Absolutely, especially if I'm getting them. And as a small businessman, I'm not getting them. What happens when you have tax cuts is they normally only go to a small group of people who can employ lobbyists, and the rest of us are left behind.
Well, there was more to that recession than just tax cuts, Gary B. It had a lot to do with the housing boom busting. But take a look at tax cuts and what that means to job gains. What's the mechanism by which that works?
Well, it's easy, Brenda. First, there's two points. One, in even the most recent study by the National Bureau of Economic Research, they found a positive correlation between tax cuts and job growth. But more importantly, people like Chuck forget we're earning the money. I mean, why isn't the right thing to do to let the people that earn the money keep the money, except for essential government services? Look, here's how it breaks down. If I go spend $1, I'm going to spend $1 normally where it's most efficient. I'm going to go to the Starbucks, and Starbucks grows, or I'm going to go to spend it on Netflix. When the government spends it, they try to deem in their mystical powers what's going to work, and that's why they come up with silly stuff like the stimulus package that we had that built all these construction projects that never turned out, things like Solyndra. So when the government spends the money, they spend it inefficiently, and that doesn't lead to any job growth. Let the people keep the money. They know how to spend it best, and that's what causes jobs to grow.
And Jonas, that's basically how it's supposed to work, is you give tax cuts, people have more money in their pockets, they spend it, companies then have to hire more workers. Do you think it works that way?
I don't think look, you can make the moral case, and I think it's a strong one that Gary just made. And by the way, you can make a case for a lot of the points that are brought up in the debate about going to a flat tax, about going to a national sales tax partially, just for the point of simplicity. I think that's enough of a benefit. But to have to go out to like Magic Land, that's also going to do all these awesome things, I think that part is questionable. There's been a lot of cases where we raised taxes and the job growth was there. And the opposite, I think in some ways there's a perverse incentive to hire people if the top brackets are a lot higher than the low brackets, because you can deduct hiring another employee and they'll do work for you and you can sit back on your hammock and work less. Because why? You were paying a high tax rate anyway. I'm just saying at a very high level. I'm not saying we're there yet, but there's some strange things. Also, our tax code is a negative tax rate right now, so it pays you to take on your first job and make a little bit of money through the earned income tax credit. It's hard to get more incentive than that. So I don't know how we're going to lower this problem with the labor force participation rate by going any more that way. We already pay you to start working. What more do you want out of this tax code? So I think to say, we're going to have lots of hiring because we change it is a bit of a stretch.
Well, I guess the idea, John, is that if you cut taxes, especially on the people who create jobs, you'll be able to hire more people.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the better comparison is Ronald Reagan's economy to President Obama's economy. Ronald Reagan created twice as many jobs, 15 million to 7 million. Ronald Reagan's GDP grew about 32% during his term. President Obama's grown about 9%. And also Ronald Reagan actually had less spending as a percentage of GDP. So I think historically this does show that it works. But most importantly, when you talk about job creators, ask my friend Chuck Rocha there how much tax he pays, and it will make you absolutely sick. that he will pay this much as part of a small business when the big companies in this country are paying an effective tax rate of 22-23% because they've been able to buy off politicians over decades. It's why we have a 72,000 plus page IRS manual, why they pay such a low rate. And the people that get stuck with the bill are people who can't influence politicians, and that's your small business, and that is who creates jobs.
Well, and let's ask John's friend, Chuck. What do you think of that?
Look, at some point I feel guilty because I'm going to agree with everybody on the panel about this piece, and I am a left-wing liberal Mexican from Texas, but I am also a small owner of an LLC, and I get taxed on my individual rates, which kill me. Also, I live in D.C., so tack another 9% tax on top of that. So when I'm sitting back thinking about if I'm going to hire, sure, I want to have a tax break, but I also want the other people paying the same amount of taxes. And I don't want you to overtax working folks, so you put a good Democrat like me in a conundrum.
Using those big words. Okay, Lisa.
Well, and Brenda, here's the irony. Look, it's liberals like Hillary Clinton that are calling for higher taxes, but let's take a look at President Obama's economy. They do it under the guise that it's going to help middle-class families. Middle-class families are making less than they did before President Obama took office. Look, we've lost hundreds of thousands of jobs in construction and manufacturing industry. So it's middle-class families who are suffering under President Obama's policies.
We just heard Mike Huckabee propose taxing non-payroll for Social Security showing up by taxing capital gains. That's a major tax increase that didn't come from a liberal. So to just spin it like only liberals are talking about tax increases, given what we just heard in the debates, is a little bit of a stretch, wouldn't you say?
Well, no, I don't think so, because look, as I mentioned before, folks like Governor Jeb Bush and John Kasich have a strong platform to talk about job creation. Let's look at the states. Look, according to a recent Gallup survey, 8 out of 10 states that are leading the nation in job growth have Republican governors. Look at a state like North Dakota, who's been leading the charge specifically on energy policies, which Republicans support. They doubled their economy in 11 years. So, yeah, let's take a look at these Republican states where Republican governors are leading the nation in job growth.
Gary B.?
Well, look, I want to come back to something that Chuck said. He said it's a conundrum. I don't think there is any conundrum here. I think one of the things that the left thinks is we must maintain the size of the government. In order to do that and all the good they provide, we need to raise taxes. No, it's simple. Cut taxes for everyone. Shrink government. Is there anyone out there that think government is as efficient, as effective it is now? There's fraud and waste in every single department we have. And we're not talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. We're talking billions of dollars across the board. There's an entire departments that could be cut without any fear whatsoever. Department of Education, for one. That should all be done locally. We can shrink the size of the government, put more money back in both corporations, since we have the highest tax rate, and individuals, grow the economy. It's all a win-win. There is no conundrum.
Okay, I'm just going to let John respond to that quickly.
Well, the conundrum, I guess, Gary B., is why will nobody listen to Steve Forbes? Steve Forbes has a simple plan. Look, a retail sales tax won't work. We go to a cash economy. That tithing idea of giving 10%, we need 18 to 19% of GDP. That's not going to work. A simple flat tax that is progressive, like Steve Forbes talked about, that will work. But the reason that it will not be done, and this is bipartisan, by the way, Republicans and Democrats, if they have a flat tax where they can't manipulate that tax code, they don't have a way for themselves to be bought off by doing favors for big companies in their district. That is why it is so hard to get a tax reform done, because these politicians enjoy being bought off.
Okay. Thanks, guys. That's got to be the last word.